everyone, and welcome to our session. I hope you're in the right session. We're talking about the three-legged stool and what happens when you include or add procurement to that three-legged stool. Before we get started, I want all of us who are on screen to go ahead and introduce ourselves and share our name, what our discipline is, and what we do at the U.S. Digital Service. And I will start off with Sparkle, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sparkle Meadows. I am the Director of Product here at the U.S. Digital Service. For us, product is like a really broad term. We include not only technical product managers, but also folks in policy who can sort of handle that side of the house. And I work with all of our product managers and our teams who are deployed on various projects throughout government, supporting them so that we continue to make the work that we're trying to do in government and the products we're trying to build actually ship and flourish in this environment. I'll pass it over to Maya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Israni. I am the Director of Engineering here at the U.S. Digital Service. I've been in this role for about 5 months now, since January. Here at USDS, our engineers also come in many different archetypes. We have front-end, back-end, full stack, site reliability, data engineers, data scientists. And similar to Sparkle, I help support all of our engineers and data scientists here at USDS and do what I can to make sure that they are able to do their best work on the various projects we have across many federal agencies. I will pass to Fonda.
Thank you, Maya. Hi, everyone. My name is Fonda. The work that I actually do is very similar to what Sparkle and Maya do as the Director of Design, but the subjects are different. So similarly, in our community of practice, we have a lot of different folks, all different shapes of designers. We also have researchers. So we have people who do UX design, UI design, product design, service design, folks who are research specialists of all different kinds of research, folks who are have a background in data analysis and data visualization, and also folks who are able to help with project management and product strategy, because we have a lot of cross-disciplinary teams where we need multiple people who can wear those hats. So yeah, I am here to support all those folks in their different roles on their different projects.
And I'll take it last. My name is Florence Casulla. I'm Director of Procurement. And similar to the rest of the ladies on the screen, I support a team that's focused on procurement. And we, as procurement people, come in different archetypes, just like the others. There are those of us who are former contracting officers, those who are former cores or are serving as current cores on some contracts, and those who may come from industry and have a specialized background in procurement on the industry side. And so when we come together, the four of us, our different disciplines come together, we work very closely with one another to help build wonderful products for the American public and those who need these types of products. So when designing this particular presentation, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have a conversation with the other directors who work on these different projects within the organization, and how to because it's a very unique scenario where procurement kind of jumps into and is aligned with the other disciplines. To my understanding, this is not a common thing within industry or outside of the federal government. It may be the same at the state level, it may be the same at the local level, but I understand it's not quite the same within the private sector. So as we get started, I wanted to pass it on to Fonda. If you can share with us what is this concept of the three-legged stool. But before you go, for everyone who's listening, if you have questions at all, if you can drop them into either the chat or the Q&A so that we can I can help moderate and we can answer questions that way. So Fonda, if you can describe for us, what is this three-legged stool concept?
Happy to. So this concept is, it's using a three-legged stool as an idea to represent all the disciplines that are involved in product development. So each leg represents an area of product development in the way that we sometimes think about it, at least in industry, where my background is. And in this model, we see all three legs as necessary, and we see all three legs as peers as well. So the idea is that proportional legs lead to sturdy stools, and these stools are good to sit on. And you do it from the beginning. So you have at least one person from each area on the team from the beginning. And you give each of those roles a voice in all of the decisions in the entire product development process from beginning to end. So you want to avoid situations where, for example, you add a design role at the end to just do the visuals. That kind of situation leads to a shaky product, in the same way that having a three-legged stool with one leg that's shorter than the others, or one leg that's broken, or one leg that's just totally missing, is a shaky stool to sit on that just leads to people falling on their butts.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that's so visual. I really appreciate that. And so, Sparkle, can you share if the three-legged stool still applies in government?
Sure. So at a high level, yes, the three-legged stool still applies. The exact way that Fonda was talking about. Whenever we work on products in government, we want to have someone from product design and engineering, sort of no matter what your background is. Most people come in understanding that having those three equal legs is absolutely critical to building and moving forward. But in a government environment, in this environment, it actually is not enough. It is not enough to just have those three legs of the stool, because if you want your product to be able to grow and scale, and within our context, everything we build within government has to be able to reach a significant number of people. So you really do need to be able to grow and scale the work that you do. And the only way that you can do that in government is with procurement. And so that is why within this context, we actually add in a fourth leg to the stool. And I think the important thing to call out here is Fonda was mentioning how, all legs of the stool need to be equal. Otherwise, you have this shaky stool and it'll fall over. And the same thing is true in government when we add in that fourth leg of procurement, because without procurement having the same voice, being involved in the process early on and throughout the process, it really, you have to have it if you want to enable products to scale in government. So you need to have that procurement leg added to the stool as well.
Great, thank you. And for anybody who has attempted to stand on a three-legged stool like I did maybe a month ago, it is not as stable as you can imagine, because if you lean on one side or the wrong side, it will tip over. But a four-legged stool, everybody, right? It's so much more stable. That's why I'm so glad that the fourth leg of procurement has been added to the stool within our organization. And I see it happening in some other organizations out there in terms of bringing in your procurement team as early as possible. Maya, in your career prior to USDS, how did you scale products that a team built?
Yeah. So full disclosure, prior to USDS, I was in private tech, and I worked in large tech companies as a full stack software engineer. And I mostly worked on internal tooling, which when you think about scaling internal products at a large company, it's not so different from scaling external products. First and foremost, in order to scale products, we really tried to make sure all decisions were data-driven. And that meant having the data to back up any decisions as to why we were investing in what areas and what areas we decided not to invest in. And that means that defining metrics early on, building out the data pipelines and visualizations to track product usage and trends over time. And then using that to identify both opportunities for investment and then opportunities for improvement. The other key component in scaling products, not dissimilar from what we do at USDS and across a lot of civic tech work, is embedding user research early and often and helping guide decisions product decisions and technical decisions from user research, and making sure that those human-centered principles are baked into how we scale products. And that means like firsthand shadowing folks and shadowing their processes and existing workflows. Because at the end of the day, the way you scale products is by meeting user needs. And so that was hugely critical in scaling as well. I'd say the third part of scaling products, and this is not dissimilar from government tech work either, was making sure you're bringing in the right intersectionality of folks as you're scaling a product. And that means that, for example, bringing in policy folks and legal folks at the right moments to really understand the ecosystem and make sure you're identifying and removing any blockers for development or scaling. That means bringing in other engineering teams to make sure that you are using scalable libraries and you're building a product that will meet the increased usages and demand. And I think we do the same in government. And Florence, I'm sure you can speak to how bringing in procurement folks as well is super important. But I'll say from my experience in the past, I did not work with procurement folks. That is something very new to me at USDS, but bringing in other non-technical folks into the conversation as you're scaling a product was super critical and continues to be critical here as well.
Great, thank you. And in terms of background, and thank you for sharing that, Maya. So my background is as a procurement person and as a contracting officer within government over the last about 14 years now. And prior to USDS, a number of organizations that I worked in, this concept of the four-legged stool, it existed, but it existed largely in silos. So you would have, if we were going to procure the services of a firm to build some digital tool or some sort of technology within that agency, it would start with, what is the problem? And it would exist primarily within a program office or like within the CIO's shop or a tech organization within the agency. And they would come up with what is the proposed solution, and it would make its way through a variety of reviews and eventually get to the procurement shop and get to, let's say, my inbox to then field to the different contract specialists or contracting officers on a team that I was on. And we would catch it at the very end, right? Like after all the requirements building has been developed, after all of the documentation has largely been drafted, we would get it and then start to read it. And oftentimes we would read something that we're not fully understanding what is the problem that they're trying to solve here. And our voice was only being brought in at the very end to help pull together the solicitation or the market research, and then get it to award and after to post-award administration. And I repeatedly saw that as problematic because there were times where the organization is under a tight deadline. You're trying to build something quickly, and bringing the procurement folks in at the very end means it's going to take them forever, or a week, 6 weeks more, just to get spun up to understand what exactly is this. And there are a lot of questions and back and forth throwing of documentation over the virtual wall to figure out what exactly is this. How do I wrap my mind around what are you actually trying to solve? And like Maya was saying, like how do you if there's something about what you're trying to build that requires scalable libraries and you don't tell us that explicitly in the documentation, how are we then going to require that of the vendor that is building? And so that we put in the language in the contract that's a necessity for whatever we're building out, even if it's at the MVP level, that the idea is planted at the very beginning. So once I started in the world of USDS and being on these different teams of that all of these disciplines share the same weight in terms of at the very beginning with agencies that we consult with and eventually work with. It is invaluable to have everyone at the table at the same time in order to understand from our different vantage points, what exactly are you hearing? What are the questions that need to be asked today, not in 6 months, when a procurement is now, like, people are starting to think about it. But it's also very helpful because most procurement people are not, typically are not highly technical. So getting folks in towards the beginning allows people to get to hear the language of whatever you're building. Phone a friend, ask people, what exactly is that? Start to understand, what are these design principles? Are we missing things by not including user research at the very, very beginning? What type of designer should we add to this particular contract? Because a designer is not a designer is not a designer. It's not like all of these disciplines come with their different backgrounds and different specialties. So just to put into a contract, we need, design services. What kind of design services? And I can ask that when I know, and I've spoken to Fonda or people within the design community of practice, what exactly are we what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and what is the right kind of discipline that we should really lean into for this type of build, knowing that we're going to eventually dance with industry on a procurement and get their feedback as well. But going into it knowledgeably is key, and gets you way ahead of the curve in terms of going back and forth with your procurement people. Jumping back into the questions, and this is for everybody. Prior to USDS, did you know anything about federal procurement? And I will pass this on to Fonda.
No, I'm going to say that in all caps. This came up, I think, during I don't remember if it was during my interview process with USDS or when I was onboarding, but I heard the term procurement and I actually had to ask, did you say procurement? And then Google it and ask a lot of questions. I was very unfamiliar. And part of that is that I had not worked in federal government before. I had only worked at private companies. And I am so glad that I've been able to learn about it since joining USDS.
Sparkle, how about you?
Yeah, so I've been in private industry for the vast majority of my career. And even in the prior government role that I had, it had nothing to do, procurement was not a thing. It was in a completely different sort of area. So coming to USDS, I didn't realize when I started how important it was. I'll never forget, I was working on a project pretty early on where, I was working with a designer and we were trying to figure out exactly what the product was that we were going to build, and had been talking to people to figure out what it was they really needed. And we, kind of were like, oh, we have what our solution is. We just need to, we're going to just buy this, this particular solution from private industry. And then we're going to just connect to it. And then we're going to be able to text people and it's going to be awesome. And I talk to the engineer, what's it going to take to implement this? And the engineer I was working with was oh, I could do this in a weekend. We were all ready to, just go and do it. And then we found out that you can't just do that. In private industry, you figure out what you need, and then you just, if you don't build it yourself, you go buy it. And so I learned that I can't, over the course of a weekend, work with, a designer and an engineer and just solve this problem, which I thought was going to be really simple to do. But that there is this whole procurement vehicle that we would actually need to work with in order to do the things that we were looking to do. And so I was oh, okay. So procurement is actually a really big thing that we really need in order to ship anything here. That's really helpful.
Great, thank you. Maya, do you have anything to add?
Just that I completely echo Fonda. I did not know anything about federal procurement before joining USDS. I knew about procurement generally, just living in DC, and it's hard not to meet someone who works for some large government contractor. But I did not know really much of anything about federal procurement. I did not know how much it was going to be involved in my work at USDS until I started. And it wasn't probably until month 3 that I had the courage to ask what the difference was between a grant and a contract, because I had been using those terms interchangeably and didn't realize that they were 2 entirely separate entities. So yeah, it's been a steep learning curve, I'd say, but hugely critical in the success of USDS projects.
Great, thank you. And for everyone's just reference, when we have people on board within the organization, we hold an orientation because the majority of our workforce comes from outside of the federal government. So we provide an orientation to get everyone up to speed as quickly as possible about what is federal procurement, what is acquisitions, what's the role of the contracting officer, where are the bright lines in terms of can you just go out and like say I want a product and immediately get it the next day? Perhaps if it lives under a particular threshold and we go through the right documentation, but making sure that those who join the organization are aware of what is happening in the world of procurement is the job of my community of practice, the procurement community of practice. And we do that in a number of ways with our own internal orientation or by the different community of practice members sitting within the projects and providing information in that way. I see a question here from Lisa asking, are you talking about procuring consultant contracts to build a product or procuring purchase software products or both? It can be both. So there are times where different teams within USDS need a particular type of tech solution, and they need it in service of a project they're working on. And so we can help in that way. And we can also help in terms of we have a team that's sitting within an agency that has built a particular product to a certain point and now needs to scale it out. And this particular team is no longer going to be the team that does the continued development of that product or multiple products. And so we will procure the services of a firm or multiple firms who will come in and take it from MVP or more developed product on in order to continue on with the development of that particular product. I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Riley's lab, how do you integrate these more agile approaches into the development approach in government tech across the 4 legs, i.e. thinking about outcomes transparently rather than a set of tech specs? Does anybody want to take that or shall I? I'll take it. So we, in terms of rather than a set of tech specs within procurement, we do not put highly prescriptive language into the contracts up front. It's more outcomes based. What are we actually going to build for? And we, within our contracts, and if you go to, and I'll put the link in the chat, the Tech Far Hub is a site where we've dropped all sorts of resources for people, specifically around procurement, in terms of the procuring of these types of services, where we work heavily with all of the different, thank you, Maya, all of the different disciplines to help build out the contract's language so that it is not just a set of tech specs, but we are buying a repeatable process around agile ceremonies to build us something, right? Like we do not want to create a requirements document that I saw, 5-10 years ago that was a laundry list of contractor, you shall do this, this, and this, 100 pages plus. And yet after 6 months, nothing has been built, right? It's a document of tech specs, but nothing has actually, there've been nothing to show for it, and millions of dollars spent on it. So we're very focused on what are the outcomes that we are we are seeking, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and getting a repeatable process that in order for whatever's being built to be iterated on over and over and over again in order to meet the needs of whoever is at the end of that, whoever is actually going to receive that particular product, that they are being that the designers are checking in with them, that there's research that's happening throughout the build of that particular contract, and it's written into the contract in that way.
Could I add one thing, Florence?
Of course.
Oh, sorry, Sparkle. I think also in the evaluation of vendors, we try to find folks who mirror our own values and processes in how we do things. So we try to strike that balance that Florence just said, of trying to not be super specific, but not super broad either. So that when we find folks, we can really understand in the evaluation process, like, how do they think about things? How do their teams work? How do they approach things in a limited amount of time? So that we can just make sure that the momentum is carried. Sorry, Sparkle, go ahead.
No, that's great. I think the other thing that I would add is that this is also why it's really important to have these conversations with procurement up front and to include them throughout the process. Because as, you know, from a product perspective, as I'm thinking about the roadmap and where we're going and what we're trying to build and what we're going to need in 6 to 12 months, if I'm able to have those conversations with the folks from procurement as we're thinking about what we're going to need, they will have that language. They will understand sort of where we're going and what we're looking for. And so we're much more aligned as they're putting together the language of what this contract actually needs. Because they understand the product that we're trying to build, they're able to do a much better job of representing that within the actual contract that's being put together versus just, you know, language flying back and forth, and they don't really understand what we're talking about when we say we need certain things, because they've actually been walking alongside with us and seeing the process and understanding where we're trying to go and what we need to get there.
Great, thank you so much. So how has working within the federal government or within the civic tech space influenced how you do your work in light of the involvement of procurement? Has anything shifted for you in terms of how you do your work within USDS and how you think about the kind of work that you do outside? I'll pass that on to Maya.
Yeah, so hugely. I think I mentioned this earlier that I did not realize coming into USDS that as an engineer, a huge part of my work was going to be working with existing contractors and engineering contractors. I don't think there's a single USDS project that I've worked on that didn't involve some aspect of procurement, either directly or indirectly. And we've touched on a little bit of this, of like how to set up successful contracts, agile contracts that involve, that are outcome driven, but also involve features like proper testing and quality assurance and flexibility for future feature development, because we all know that launching a product is not a one and done, that there's a non-trivial amount of work that goes into the ongoing maintenance of the product and continually upgrading it and updating it, and building in features like usability testing. Like I mentioned earlier, these are components that are super important as we scale products in private industry and in government tech as well. I think another key component is that, you know, here at USDS, we're on a maximum of 4 years for our tours of service. And the products that we're building are going to outlive our tenures here at USDS. And so procurement is really helpful in kind of future-proofing some of that work and making sure that we're setting up products that can be flexible enough and sustained beyond any of our tenures here, beyond USDS's involvement in a project, and making sure that we're setting it up from the get-go to be successful in the future. So yeah, I'll say that it was definitely an adjustment of expectations in realizing how important procurement was and how it was actually so interrelated with the engineering work that we would do. but it's been awesome so far. And I personally love working with our procurement experts. We call them our procurementati, and Florence's team. So yeah. Sparkle, can I toss it to you?
So I have learned a lot since my first project where I didn't understand the role that procurement played. I think for me, I think about procurement early in the project every single time. And now being in this role, when I have teams, if we don't already have someone in procurement who is at least like checked in with them and understands like where they are, where the project is at, like that's something that we like to flag, because as Maya said, from a future-proofing standpoint, long-term, for projects to be sustainable, for products to live and to grow and continue to scale, there is going to be some element of procurement involved. And so to do everything we can up front to set those projects up for success is something that I have taken way more and is more top of mind, in the same way that, you just kind of think about, all right, when we get started, we're going to put together a roadmap and figure out where we're going. Like part of that journey is adding in procurement and making sure that, that they have a voice in the room, that they know what's going on, that they understand. And it's great because I found that there have been cases where they have flagged things for me that I wasn't aware of. Like I might know that we need, some contract help, and I'm thinking about like what kinds of people we need, because I know I'm going to need to let them know that we need this type of person and not that type of person, and this skill set, not that skill set. But there's so many nuances around, how we can get these teams on board. There's different vehicles within government, depending on which agencies you're working with and what's already existing. And it has just been an absolute pleasure to have someone who knows all of this information and can work with me to navigate those things and kind of explain what the options are. So from my perspective, I think that procurement is, they're definitely critical, and definitely I think are essential to the success of the growth and scale of any projects that we have within the federal space. Fonda, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have to echo a lot of what you both have said, particularly the way that we scale human-centered design and product development in government after we leave. And I think that goes not just for us at USDS, but for government in general. There are so many projects that last many, many years and require a lot of people to carry the baton after others. Another thing that I'll mention is, in terms of building capacity at agencies that we work with, or other government teams, it has changed the way that I think about hiring and how to build capacity. Before my time at USDS, I think my experience was just building capacity by hiring other full-time employees, collaborating with other teams, hiring freelancers, or in some cases, like having a company be acquired and like folded into the larger company. And so here, a lot of the way that work gets done or expanded is, and the way that we build capacity is by hiring contractors. And that's an important difference for me because one, as we've already talked about before, it's just a different process. And it's second, it's a process that requires navigation with the help of procurement. It's not something that any of our three-legged stool areas could handle on our own. It's something like that we need to have procurement there from the beginning. And this is kind of similar to the way that I think about some of our more policy-heavy projects or legal-heavy projects. There's something that it just requires a lot of cross-disciplinary collaboration from the start so that nothing is missed. And I love that kind of work. So it's been really great.
Great, thank you. And to that point, Fonda, I would say if there is a fifth leg to this stool, it is definitely our industry partners who come in and are part of the building of successful products and helping to meet the different missions that our agencies are focused on. Because the government can't do the business of government without industry, right? Like that is a fact. And so we need to make sure that we are finding really great industry partners to come in and do the work alongside us. And we definitely really and truly believe in the partnership of government and our industry partners. So the way that we can do that in the best way possible is what we are seeking. And I see a question from Ni Zhu, I believe, who asks, does USDS use challenge-based cooperative or sole source procurement? When we go into the different engagements with the agencies, we explore all types of procurement angles that in order for us to meet the need. So if that is through an 8A sole source award, so be it, if that's where the market research takes us. If that's through a competitive multi-award, multi-vendor BPA or IDIQ, so be it. So we follow however the market research is going to lead us, and we move in that direction in order to get an award down for the team that's working on a particular project as quickly as possible. Because what we don't want is for there to be what I've seen in some places, like an 18-month, a 12-month lead time to award a contract in order for something to be built, where a lot of the time the projects that we're working on have an urgency kind of built into them, and there is an immediate need. We've all been living through this pandemic, and there are a number of projects that we've been working on that involve pandemic related issues that cannot wait for a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month lead time. So we, as the procurement team, help shape procurements that can be buttoned down as quickly as possible. And there are times where we are working in collaboration with our different procurement shops across the agencies to make that happen. It's not just our acquisition team, it's working alongside the acquisition teams within the agencies. Maya, were you coming off mute to share something?
No.
Okay. So we're coming towards the end, and I just wanted to get some final shout outs for across the folks here in terms of what would you tell, and if you haven't put a question into the chat, now would be a good time so that we can get to those towards the end. What would you tell new to the government engineers, designers, product people about the role of procurement when it comes to shipping and scaling great digital products? I think a lot has already been said, but what would be your final takeaways? And I will pass that to Sparkle first.
Yeah. So for folks who are new to government, I think the thing that I would call out, and I said it in various ways, probably several times, but I think it just is so true, is that procurement is really essential when it comes to the continued momentum to grow and scale a product. And so if you understand that and you know that, I think that will really impact how you incorporate procurement into the product work that you do. Maya?
I would say pretty much the exact same thing, Sparkle. For someone new to government, I would say do some homework, read the resources like the ones in the Tech FAR Hub, ask those questions early and often, bring procurement folks in early and often. If you have an inkling that there might be something procurement related, trust your gut and bring them into the conversation, bring them into the project, at least in a consulting capacity, a procurement expert in the conversation in a consulting capacity as soon as possible. And just also remembering that at least within the US Digital Service, within government tech, procurement is, as it stands today, a really critical component of our ecosystem. And industries and government hiring and agency capacity might change over time. But remembering that, as Florence mentioned, in addition to our three-legged stool, we have the fourth leg of procurement. That's really important in government tech, and the fifth leg of, say, industry or external partners, and that's also critically important. And balancing that, I think, is really key as we're building products. Fonda?
Couldn't have said it better myself with like how critical procurement is, which is what Maya was talking about, and the momentum that Sparkle was talking about. I would add to have an attitude of partnership and mutual learning. It's really important to read up on things and ask questions, as Maya and Sparkle were talking about. And it's also, I think, important to not make any assumptions about what other people know about your own work and your own discipline. I think especially in technical fields, there are sometimes buzzwords of the day that fly around a lot, and don't make any assumptions about what someone else thinks that role is. And don't be afraid to just be really clear with your questions, and also really clear with definitions to help bring people along so that you're both bringing each other along. And by both, I mean all of you, because there's definitely going to be more than two roles.
I definitely agree with that, Fonda. The asking of questions piece is so key, especially because from the different corners that we come from, the knowledge is so deep that I think sometimes there are times where I've shied away from asking a question. And I was listening to an interview of Angelique Kidjo some time back. Angelique Kidjo is a West African singer who said that one of her family members, I think her father, said, you really need to make sure that you ask the question that you have in order to get the answer. You do yourself and everybody else a disservice if you have a question and you hold on to it and you don't ask, right? And so from the different disciplines that we're in, I really encourage everyone to ask the question when you have it, because it just makes the product that much better. The product in terms of that you're trying to build, and the product in terms of the contract that you're trying to award in the future. There are some questions here that I want to get to. Lisa asks, do you have any specific categories or skill sets that you cultivate through consultant rosters, approved vendor lists? So we don't have any approved vendor lists per se. We do do continuous market research especially through the different agencies that we partner with. When we're engaged in a procurement with an agency, we make sure that the market research is strong. So we're trying to make sure that we are bringing in highly experienced businesses. Most of them are small businesses that are specialized in building software in collaboration with really great human-centered design principles, and have strong product baked in. Not just like in the past, there were times where to build software, I certainly can say that I awarded a contract way back when, where it's like, we want to build software. The government wants to build software. And we looked for a software design firm, a software engineering firm, and it was just engineers. We didn't seek any design. There was no mention of design. There was no mention of like strong product, nothing. It was just like, they have fabulous engineers and that's it. That's the only thing that matters. And the proof was in that pudding. In terms of like, I love you engineers out there, but there is something to be said about like when something is designed beautifully with the, people in mind, and can be brought to bear with great product direction. So in terms of the question here, do you have any specific categories or skill sets that you cultivate through consultant rosters, approved vendor lists? We don't have approved vendor lists. In terms of specific categories or skill sets, I'd like to say that a lot of the acquisitions that we do are bespoke in terms of it really depends on what you are building. So we really focus on what exactly are we building? What is the problem that we're trying to solve for here? and then building the contract documents around that. Yes, some things can be templates in terms of perhaps like the base of the contract language. And I encourage you to go to the TechFar Hub site to see some of that. But the really sharp pieces of that contract language it's going to really come from understanding what the need is and talking to your the partners around you, all of like talking to your engineers, your designers, your product folks to understand how are we actually getting what are we trying to solve. So in terms of specific categories, it can be broad strokes, but I am not going to look for my example before was I'm not going to just say we need designers for a thing, right? Or I'm not going to say, you know, we need researchers for a particular thing when I don't know exactly what it is. So the specific categories come through the conversations with the team on the ground to understand what exactly is needed.
Florence, can I ask a follow-up to that, actually?
Sure.
And I'll be the first to say that great products are not only built with fabulous engineers. They also include product and procurement design. But can you speak a little bit more to like, what are the specific activities that happen with great market research?
Oh, sure. So I'd like to say that I see things as market intelligence and market research, that there are two different angles here. Market intelligence being understanding the market and seeing what firms are out there doing great things, and understanding how the market works, and what incentivizes and motivates those firms. Then the market research on the government side is often what often informs our acquisition approach. So not only understanding what firms are out there, understanding what their capabilities are, and what have they built in the past? What from business to business or within industry, what have they built in the past? What have they built successfully for the government at the different tiers of government, whether that's local, state, federal, et cetera. And so some of the activities around market research, many people know the RFI, the request for input or information approach, where a document or series of documents are posted online at a federal site. sam.gov is the site now. And there are other places. If you're a GSA vendor, there's sometimes where market research requests for information are posted within GSA as well. I've seen market research documentation thrown out on within GitHub as well. And in other places, I've seen market research get pushed onto within LinkedIn and other sites where the more eyeballs see it, the better, in order to get as many eyes and as much input as possible from industry. So there is the push out of documentation and then the pull in of content from vendors. There are industry days where many, because of the pandemic, have been virtualized in order for, which I think has actually worked out really well, because in the past there have been industry days where there have been regional, and so that would omit some vendors, some really great vendors that just could not travel from across the U.S. to come to the DC metro area to sit in in an auditorium to hear about a particular project. So there are virtual industry days where the government will say, "Hey, here's our problem statement. How would you go about approaching it? What should we think about? And what around this particular problem set?" And that helps to inform. That's part of the market research to inform our future approaches. There are also reverse industry days that have also been done, where we will have a panel of vendors come and provide their approaches and their information and input about a particular problem that they've seen within the federal space, or they've acknowledged or seen within like an RFI that's been pushed out there. And so there are many ways to get to do market research, but at the end of the day, it's really helping to, it's really a conversation between government and industry. in order for us to understand what capabilities are out there and how should we go about moving forward with this particular acquisition and future acquisitions down the line. Let's see, other questions that are out there. You said you tried to look for vendors that have the same values regarding Agile, HCD. So I was wondering if on your consultant roster list, you have that as a criteria or category, so it's easier to see if a vendor's mindset and approach matches yours. I would be careful to say we don't need it to match ours necessarily. It's really, we want to understand what are your capabilities in order to build fabulous things, right? Do you know how to build fabulous digital products and that meet the needs of the humans that are going to be on the receiving end of those things? And what is your approach to doing that? I think Agile is a word that is like, I'm very careful around it because Agile means many things to many people. And I've seen people say Agile and they actually mean, like, people have coined the term like Agile fall, or, you know, these different versions of Agile. But do you build things with people in mind? Do you keep those people? Do you center those people as you're building those things? And do you build those things iteratively and get better and better over time? That is essentially it. So unless the other ladies here want to add to that, but we are really trying to find vendors who do that. And there are many who do that. And so we go through the procurement process to find the one or many, depending on the procurement approach that's being moved forward, that can meet the need at that time.
Florence, on that note, there was a question that I think ties right into this, which is around how we balance cultivating trusted vendors that know our products with diversifying vendors and the capacity to support our products. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how we keep our vendor pool diverse versus just kind of going with the same vendors over and over again. Sure.
And so the vendor pool ends up being diverse by nature of the different types of products that we're building. Because there are some, like I came from DoD procurement. That's where I grew up in my acquisition roles. And so there were some vendors who only did business with DoD. And there are some vendors who, now that I'm on the civilian side, absolutely don't do business with DoD, because there are a number of rules and regulations that exist within the DoD world that a number of vendors that are familiar with, that are in the civilian space, just don't want to tangle with, for good or for not. But in terms of the diversity of vendors, I think a lot of it stems from market research and pushing out information to the vendor pool through all kinds of market research efforts to make sure that the information lands in as many places as possible, and having conversations. As we've said, starting early matters. Not getting the procurement information at the end, like when something is hot and you need it today, or like you need it tomorrow. Making sure that we are engaging in conversations with industry as early as possible is beneficial. And so what we've also heard from the small business community is it takes time to ramp up to like bid on a thing. It takes time to like figure out what is my strategy going to be to actually go for a particular award or respond to a solicitation. And so we want to give that vendor community as much lead time as possible. And we do that through working with our agency partners on the ground and doing helping do that market research and get the word out that there is a need coming up. And that's through market research. That's through conversations with vendors that are targeted. And by targeted, I mean making sure that we include as many vendors as possible, small, large, women-owned small businesses, service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, the whole gamut, to make sure that they're aware of what the opportunities are.
I think one other thing that I would add to that, just from the concept of like pulling from the same pool versus having diverse vendors, is ideally every time, like Florence mentioned earlier, every time we're putting together a contract, when we need support, it is for that very specific case. And not every project needs the same things. You don't always need the same skill sets. Sometimes there's a particular specialty that you want. And so, if that's the case, you want to flag that you want, these particular roles or these particular skill sets. So I think part of the way you kind of ensure that you're working with good vendors, but that you're not necessarily working with the same vendors, is having a good understanding of what you need for this particular case, which may not be the same as the product that, was built 6 months ago in a different place. Like the needs will change. And different vendors will be able to support different, sort of those different specific cases.
Right. And I think to that point, there are some that I've seen, like if we've done work with HHS, there are some vendors that have a very deep skill set around health IT. And they are very focused on that kind of work. And they will not issue any sort of proposal or provide a quote for work that we might do with Homeland Security or VA, because that's not where their particular mission lies. Even though they build fabulous products, this is just not where their focus is. So that also, I agree there, Sparkle, adds to the diversity of the vendor pool as well. So we're coming up on 4 minutes left. I see some questions. If anyone wants to tackle any of these, let me see if I can find some to jump out. Let's see. Allison, what does USDS look for, and what does USDS recommend for state procurement teams? I think it's the same thing in terms of recruiting, hiring, empowering your people on the ground to know what the tech is, to have open and early conversations with the technologists that you're working with, and make sure that they cultivate the relationships there. There are other people who are on the team, of course, that I'm not mentioning. There's legal, there's policy, there's budget, security. There are all sorts of people who are within your realm that your procurement people need to have an immediate, really good relationship with, in order to be successful. I think part of this is making sure that also your procurement teams are as trained and well-informed as possible about what they're buying. Doing a Google search is wonderful, but doing it on the day that you're trying to help procure a thing is very hard. It leaves them vulnerable, and I think it increases the amount of risk to your procurement if your procurement teams, state, federal, wherever, are just learning about the technology when they are getting that particular requirement in their hands to run. So making sure that people are as informed and as trained as possible up front, making sure that your people are trained and that you provide the resources for that is really, really important. We have 1 more minute left, and I want to thank everybody for participating in this session. Thank you for my co-panelists for being here, and for everyone who's asked questions. If you have any follow-on questions, I will type my email here in the chat, and you can hit me by email. I'm also available on LinkedIn as well. Thank you all for coming.